Now, typically when you mention the word forge and irons in the same sentence, there's a few other words that aren't associated with that combination. Forgiving, long, and especially the word cheap. However, do not buy these irons if you are a player. But ladies and gentlemen, I think I've done it. I think I've ticked all the boxes. We're talking £150 for a full forged iron set that delivers forgiveness, that delivers distance, and also gives you the soft feel and sound of what a forged iron is so sought after. Question is, why are they so cheap, and how have they actually managed to do it? Oh, she is gone. And I hit that out of the toe. Now, don't get me wrong, the year 2015 had a plethora of good forged irons. We're talking AP2 716, we're talking the Apex CF16 irons, TaylorMade PSI, you name it. But looking at the sole, looking at the head design of these forged irons, I almost get a feel that they're for that senior player that was using blades and now wants a level of forgiveness. Or for that player that's improving and wants to dabble in the market of a forged iron and wants to get a feeling of what a forged iron head feels on a hot summer's day through that ball and turf interaction, but at the end of the day wants to experiment. So let's be honest, we don't want to spend £1,000 on that said experiment. And to be fair, the irons that I mentioned there, whether it's the AP2 or the Apex, the PSI, are all pretty reasonable. If anything, the PSI TaylorMade iron is probably going for the same price, and it's the club that I used for years, especially when I was playing competitive golf. I'd stand by that iron head against any other forged iron head from its time, but it's definitely not as big, it's definitely not as forgiving as what I have here, and probably goes to show why I keep hitting this club out the toe and it keeps going forward. The other big advantage is that this isn't a well-known brand in the modern era. Back in the past, this club manufacturer dominated tournament after tournament, and every pro shop and golfer alike putting it in the bag. Whereas nowadays, even though they're definitely improving in terms of the demand in the iron section, when it comes to the second-hand market, fortunately for me and you, they don't necessarily hold the same name brand appeal, especially when it comes to the price tag. So let's talk about the tricks up its sleeve. And for you more traditional golfers, you'll be happy to know that the 7-iron in this set, even though it does look quite like a cavity back, is actually lofted at 35 degrees. Which then would beg the question, Simon, how do I get any distance out of these irons considering the traditional lofts on them and such a big head design? Well, sneakily, these are ½ an inch longer than virtually all the other brands that you put alongside it. That's not necessarily going to help you players that struggle with a consistent centered strike. However, for you ball strikers, the steady eddies, the one that's get it down the middle, that extra length in shaft might mean a bit more clubhead speed, which ultimately means a bit more distance. Which is why I call this the experimental set that isn't that expensive. I see it suiting two types of players. Your more senior player looking for that extra distance, but doesn't want to quite go to the cavity graphite shafted irons just quite yet. And also that player that does have the cavity back iron that wants to dabble with some forgedness. But at the same time, let's be honest, doesn't quite find the middle 100% of the time. But that's a few positives, and before I talk about the others, this game is about compromises. You can't have distance and control. You can't have high launch, ultra distance and workability in the same sentence. Meaning for that player that wants the flight shots, try and shape them around the trees, such as this one. Oh, it's a good job I caught it thin. Sadly, it won't go through a tree. You're somewhat going to be underwhelmed with this type of forged iron head. That being said, I could have probably hit that a bit better. Lastly, let's talk sole, because to be honest, when it comes to forged irons, there isn't such a thing. And if you live in a country similar to England and you have rain a good 7 months of the year, let's be honest, the ground is going to get wet. Meaning that if you have something that's, let's say, a bit bladed and you catch that leading edge, well, you're going to be taking more than just the ball around the golf course. And to be honest, this is the biggest sold, biggest grind, whatever you want to call it, on the bottom of a forged iron I've ever seen. meaning for that guy transitioning into a forged head or that senior looking for a bit more distance, well, this kind of ticks all the boxes. Oh, lovely little flight. Be the one. Oh, don't tell me we're hitting good golf shots now. Boys and girls, I give you the F5 FG Tour irons from Wilson Staff. And underrated is a statement, especially when we start looking at prices that you can get them for and condition. And to be fair, these caught my eye when I was at Replay Golf, and thanks to the boys for obviously loaning me the golf clubs, because back in the day, you could almost class this as a bit underwhelming in terms of aesthetics. Whereas nowadays, I think we've almost gone too much the other way. The typical player looking for this kind of forged classic iron probably doesn't want bright red, bright green, bright yellow, bright blue. They want something that looks like what they had 20 odd years ago, but with a bit more technology. Again, the shaft selection that you find in these irons are very much up to date and still current in a lot of irons that you see nowadays. And a Project X 6.0, well, let's be honest, is just a bit classic. And technology is exactly what it has. We've got 8620 steel in the head to give you that forged feeling, as well as the bits that I talked about earlier. Smart sole, more loft, longer shafts, again to give you that height, that distance, as well as maintaining the feel, the sound of the other irons I mentioned, which, let's be honest, are a bit more expensive. Not too much, however, at 250 to 300 pounds, but this is, for me, more forgiving and 150 quid cheaper. Another bonus is that even though these have a similar cavity back design as, let's say, your traditional cavity backs or beginner clubs, they're not offset. They don't look like they're pointing to the left. And for that player that wants the forged feeling and forgiveness, it's always that toing and throwing. You hit a lovely little draw, or maybe you pull the ball a tiny bit too much left. You want more forgiveness, but cavity back iron's going to want it to go more left. And ultimately, that's not what you're after. As he says, pulling it left on the par 3 down at Sanford. Tell you what, the course is starting to get there. Now it's getting drier. And let this sink in, £150. What can you buy in golf that's £150, especially when it comes to iron sets? Not to mention, these are just a bit different from everything else. However, do not buy these irons if you are a player that can swing the club fast, because they're true lofted, because they are that much longer. If you do hit a relatively high ball flight already, Jesus. Well, these definitely aren't going to keep it down in the wind. But as I said, there's multiple options for that typical player that's looking for more of that. Your AP2, your Callaway Apex Pro. Even keep more current with the Wilson Staff Tour iron. These are essentially mini hybrids that are forged. And for the player that I mentioned earlier, for £150, as you can see up here on the right hand side. Not to mention, this brand of golf club has more major wins than any other brand, meaning more professionals have used this brand to win majors than any other. And yet, it's now one of the cheapest second-hand. Guys, I hope you liked this video, and if you did, you might like this video up here on the left-hand side. Catch you guys later.